Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Chapter 13. Going to be working with contracts that may just not be enforceable in court. So the first learning objective is says, what type of situations might voluntary consent to a contract terms be lacking? And the text lists four. The first one are mistakes, and of course mistakes, we all make them, and they're certainly common in contracts as well. What can happen, however, if a mistake is made in a contract, if a mistake is one of fact, not as to, for example, value or quality. So if I, for example, sell you a piece of art that I think has a value of about $500, and you agree to buy it at that price, then later discover that it's worth $1 million. That's not a mistake of fact, and that's not avoidable. But if it's one of fact, then of course the courts may declare that the contract is voidable by one of the parties. The second one is fraudulent misrepresentation. Whenever you're in a contract and you're relying on what a person is telling you, you justifiably rely on what they're telling you. In other words, it's something material, meaning material means that if you had known the difference, you would not have entered a contract. If you enter a contract by fraudulent means, then it's possible that you would be able to back out of that contract. The third one is undue influence. We have what we call a fiduciary relationship between certain parties, for example, between a doctor and a patient, between a lawyer and client, and between parents and child, and it might be a caretaker with an elderly person, for example. When that person takes advantage of the other party, if the dominant party takes advantage of the less dominant party, for example, a niece or nephew taking care of an elderly aunt, and they convince them into selling them a certain bit of property for little or no money, that the injured party could probably have that contract set aside. And the last one is duress, and duress simply means that a person enters a contract because they're afraid not to enter the contract, for fear that they will be injured or someone close to them will be hurt or whatever. The second learning objective talks about the difference between a unilateral and a bilateral mistake. Unilateral means one party, so if the mistake occurs when one party is mistaken as to a material fact, just one party, then it's quite possible, it may be possible that contract could be avoided by that party. And the second one is a bilateral mistake. That's when both parties are mistaken as to a material fact. And it could be something dealing with the legal aspect of transferring property. For example, if they assume that a certain document will transfer the title automatically, they both believe that in reality it doesn't, then either of the parties can be sent back out of that contract. The third objective talks about fraudulent misrepresentation. What are the elements? There are three. First off, the misrepresentation must be material. And of course, again, material fact means that if we had known the difference, we wouldn't have entered the contract in the first place. So it says, first off, the misrepresentation must occur. There must be intent to deceive. Example, if I'm going to sell you a car, and if you look at my car, you can see that one side is bashed in. It's obviously been an accident. And I say to you, well, this car is in prime condition, never been in an accident, and so forth. Obviously, I'm joking. And so if there's no intent to deceive, but the innocent party must justifiably rely on that misrepresentation, justifiably. So by looking at the car, they can see that it has been an accident. So if they enter the contract anyway, they have not been deceived. So they must be material, the misrepresentation must intent to deceive, and then the innocent party must justifiably rely on that misrepresentation. And number 4 talks about contracts that must be in writing to be enforceable. Many times students believe that all contracts have to be in writing to be enforceable. In reality, most contracts are not in writing. They are oral contracts, and they're just as valid. The problem, of course, is if one of the parties decides not to fulfill the terms, then, of course, you have to go to court to try to prove what those terms were. So anyway, these are the contracts that must be in writing to be enforceable. The first one involves contracts involving the interest in land. So if you're going to buy or sell land or anything permanently attached to land, that contract has to be in writing to be enforceable in court. The second one, contracts that cannot by their very terms be performed within 1 year from the date the contract was formed. For example, if a contract was made today, starting tomorrow, that contract must be able to be performed within 1 year for an oral contract to be valid. If it goes beyond that year, if that contract by the very terms cannot be performed within the date of that formation, it has to be in writing. So, for example, if I say I want you to work for me for a total of 5 years, starting today, obviously that cannot possibly be completed within 1 year. So when times are listed, then you simply go and you figure out tomorrow would be the date you would start, and then exactly 1 year from that time. Is it possible that contract can be performed within that time? Okay, this next one is collateral secondary promises. If I go into the store with my young adult daughter and I say to the clerk, she says to the clerk she wants to buy clothes and she wants to charge him, and the clerk says, "Ooh, I don't know, you don't have credit established," and so forth. And so I say to the clerk, go ahead and open the charge account for her, and if she doesn't pay, I will. That would be a collateral promise, and it would have to be in writing. If, however, we simply walk in the store and I say to the clerk, give her what she wants and send me the bill, that's not a collateral promise. That's an original promise of mine, and assuming it doesn't go over $500, then the oral contract will be valid. The next one is promises made in consideration of marriage. Of course, we're talking basically about prenuptial agreements, and of course, those have to be in writing and signed prior to the marriage. And finally, the last one is the sale of goods. So any goods or anything that's movable at the time of the sale. Anytime the contract involves goods valued at $500 or more, that contract has to be in writing to be enforceable. And finally, we're going to be talking about the parole evidence rule and when is it admissible to actually provide oral evidence or other type testimony to prove the terms of a contract. Well, the parole evidence rule basically says if two parties have a contract, they're going to assume that it's exactly what the parties intended, and they're not going to attempt to change anything. However, there are some exceptions to that rule. For example, the first one says that the contracts have been subsequently modified. As long as the original contract didn't forbid that modification, that would come into it, and that modification did not bring the value of the goods above the $500 level, therefore making it fall under the statute of frauds. That would be an exception to the parole evidence. If you have a voidable or void contract, that would be, you could use parole evidence. So, for example, if you want to prove that the only reason you entered a contract is because you were under duress, you were afraid not to, you could use parole evidence or oral evidence to prove that. If a contract has ambiguous terms, ambiguous means it has more than one meaning. You can use evidence to show the actual meaning of the terms. The next one is if you have a contract that's incomplete, if there's gaps missing, then you can use parole evidence or oral evidence to actually fill in those gaps. The next one talks about prior dealings, usage, trade usage, and so forth. If, for example, in the past you've always done something a certain way, it's just going to be assumed that you will continue doing that, and probably won't even mention it in the contract. You just assume because you've always done it that way that will continue. And the same would apply with usage of trade. If it's a certain custom within an industry, it's going to assume that people dealing with those contracts know that, and it's quite possible that they don't get specific in that area. If one of the parties isn't aware of it, then they can use parole evidence to prove that. And the next one talks about contracts are subject to an orally agreed upon condition precedent, which means that the contract doesn't even have to be enforced or even started until a certain condition is met. And the last one says the contracts with obvious clerical errors, and these are usually numerical. So if you have a contract in which a huge mistake, an obvious mistake has been made between the oral, by the time you get it in writing, and the clerical error, the courts would probably allow you to back out of that contract. Anyway, that's the end of Chapter 13. Good luck with it. I think you'll like it. And, oh, shoot, I didn't realize this thing came out there. Anyway, sorry about that. I heard it come up, but I forgot to take it off. Anyway, those are the learning objectives for Chapter 13, and I'll see you in Chapter 14.